Hi everyone and welcome back. Now before we get going today, I just wanted to mention that our concert series, Bach and Brew, is having its first concert of the season. It's on September 25th. If you happen to be in New York City and are looking for something to do that may involve really great music and free beer, then look no further. All the details are below and I hope to see you guys all out there. So, you guys may have noticed our new series where I interview my former teacher, Kaplan. So while we were there, we took the opportunity to try out his violin, which is a beautiful 1773 Giovanni Battista Guadagnini. As an instrument, it's got this wonderfully liquid, rich tone to it that projects and penetrates in equal measure. It speaks beautifully and is an instrument that I would love to play and get to know more. I'll let Mr. Kaplan speak a little bit more about it now.
It's a 1773 Jean-Baptiste Guadagnini made in Turin, the early part of his Turin period. I know the history of it going back into perhaps the late 30s. It was owned by an amateur violinist who was a great collector in London named Gerald Segelman. And it was brought to the United States around 1948 by Rembert Wurlitzer. Sold to a teacher at Eastman, who then sold it to one of his students. She eloped one night, and her father, a doctor in Ohio, did not approve of this at all, and about his only vengeance or revenge was to take away the violin from her. And I bought the instrument in 1961, and have really been very fortunate, enjoyed it. So it was my violin all through Aeolian chamber players, and I'd like to think that it's amazing that some of the wonderful pieces written for the Aeolians were premiered on this violin, so it has its own interesting history.
Maybe you'll remember that we've done another Guadagnini video as 1785 from Guadagnini's same period in Turin. This one I do like more than the 1785 simply because it seems to have more finesse to it. It's more elegant, but in that video we talked a lot about wood and a little bit about Guadagnini's backstory. And I was thinking, well, what am I going to do this video on then if I've already talked all about Guadagnini? And it turns out, of course, there was always more to talk about. First off, I wanted to address some of the confusion when someone mentions the name Guadagnini. As with a lot of these big names, there's a whole dynasty surrounding them. There's Lorenzo, the father, Giovanni Battista, that's our guy, Giuseppe, Gaetano, Carlo, and Lorenzo, his sons, Felice, Carlo, and Gaetano, the grandsons, Giuseppe, Felice, and Antonio, the great-grandsons, and I could go on easily, because that school of Guadagnini's luthiers actually ends in 1942 with Paolo Lorenzo. So, our guy, Giovanni Battista Guadagnini, is sometimes referred to as GB Guadagnini and sometimes as JB. And this is purely just translation. Giovanni Battista, Jean-Baptiste, John Baptist, it's all the same. So as I went digging through the archives, I realized that he had a frankly enormous output. 250 violins plus violas and cellos is kind of astounding. Of course, Stradivari, that man of the benchmark, had over 1,000 instruments to his name, but remember, with the help of a fine shop and assistants. And anyway, Stradivari always looms over everyone else. But Guadagnini, who was active from 1740 to 1786, made 7 violins in his first year alone. So Guadagnini had 5 periods in his life, which we can track through his instruments in his labels. The first is Piacenza from 1740 to 1749, then Milan, 1749 to 1758, a little flirtation with Cremona from 1758 to 1759, Parma from 1759 to 1770, and the period that I am most familiar with and is arguably his most popular, his Turin period, 1770 to 1786. So why was there so much moving around? Well, we have to think about that time period. Stradivari was gone. The golden age of violin making was in swift decline due to a failing economy and more of a disinterest in violins in general. With 45 major cities in Italy, it was still divided up into several duchies and kingdoms. So, as an artisan, you were very much dependent on the interest of the duke or king of wherever you lived. Disease was beginning to spread, and the rich were having a harder time staying rich, much less spending on fine instruments. So, Guadagnini followed the money and the musicians from city to city, wherever it was to be found at that moment. He started off at age 27, opening his first shop in Piacenza, near where he was born. During that time, 27 was an extremely late age to begin work on your own shop. And yet, in his first year, he produced, like I mentioned before, 7 violins. This begs the question, what was he doing before that time? The answer is, we don't quite know for sure. He could have been studying with his father, Lorenzo, who was also a luthier. But this fact in and of itself is also questionable, as Lorenzo's violins were never irrefutably proven to be his. Add to that the fact that Lorenzo spent his life as a farmhand and died in poverty, and things are already not quite lining up. But Giovanni Battista had definitely apprenticed as a carpenter in his younger years, so perhaps this was an eccentric young man striking out on his own with no former experience. Again, it's doubtable. His earliest instruments are much too refined to be the work of even a journeyman. So, who did Giovanni Battista Guadagnini study with? It might have been Stradivari. I've seen plenty of his labels that read Alumnus Antonio Stradivari, but for some reason, they only start appearing in his Turin period. That's his last period, his latest works, when he was under the sponsorship of Count Salabue. Now, if you remember anything about Count Salabue from the previous Guadagnini video, he was a great proponent of the arts and violins in particular. He had his own tidy little Stradivari collection, along with many other instruments from the Cremonese school. He pushed Guadagnini to give up his own personal little quirks and style in favor of a more Stradivarian appearance. In Piacenza, Guadagnini's earliest period, the arching was on the flatter side. The varnish was yellow and red, the F-holes were very slender. In Milan, he reached his most flamboyant, with widely cut scrolls and a beautiful, rich red varnish. In Parma, the F-holes became more elongated, the archings turned much higher, and the varnish became paler. Which brings us again to Turin, with the orange-brown varnish, the gorgeous tone, the Stradivarian stylings, and the labels. Other than these labels, we have no proof that he actually was a Stradivari student. Could it be that he was a bit of a modest man and didn't pull this connection out until the end of his life? Or could it be, as my friend pointed out to me the other day, he was probably just sitting through a Stradivari masterclass and was like, yeah, I'm going to write studied with Stradivari in my bio. Whatever the case, we know that Giovanni Battista Guadagnini had an incredible body of work, one gorgeous instrument after another, and a whole school of luthiers that followed him. So does it really matter if he studied with Stradivari or not? And lastly, just to put some things in perspective, Guadagnini's dates are 1711 to 1786. So here are some things that happened in his lifetime. Vivaldi arrived in Vienna in 1740, hoping to take up a position as court composer under Charles VI. Unfortunately, Charles died soon after, leaving Vivaldi destitute. Vivaldi himself died in 1741 in Vienna from an infection that would have been entirely preventable had he the funds to spare for a doctor. The Trevi Fountain was built in Rome in 1762, the height of Italy's Rococo style. The Turkish-Venetian War was underway, resulting in huge territory loss for the Republic of Venice and ultimately resulting in its fall in 1797. Women were wearing this, and men were wearing this. So I hope that sets a little stage for Guadagnini and his incredible work and for this beautiful instrument. Thank you to Louis Kaplan for allowing us to take a look at his violin. And if you guys enjoyed this video, please give us a like, subscribe, and shoot us a comment. So until next time, cheers!